best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, the best place for in-depth discussions, analysis, sprinkled with some silliness. And we are back to talk Star Wars The Acolyte. Obviously, the third episode of Star Wars The Acolyte just aired on June the 11th, if you are in America, or June the 12th here in Europe, in the UK. I am the Geordie Jedi Pete, and I'm joined by two awesome guests, if you want to introduce yourselves.
I'm Kat Reese-Elka.
I am Chris from Dystopian Simulation Radio.
He is indeed. Obviously, Chris, you were here when we deep dived episodes 1 and 2. Obviously, the double episode premiere of The Acolyte. Obviously, Kat, you missed out. I know you were busy having crazy parties probably somewhere, celebrating The Acolyte. But there's something that I didn't mention last week that I thought about afterwards that I want to talk about. And I also want to hear about Kat's thoughts about episodes 1 and 2. So the two things that I came with was, I didn't mention, I feel like we didn't discuss, May, when she's fighting the Jedi, obviously, there's a few times when she fights Indara where she tries to grab Indara's lightsaber, and Indara sort of maneuvers away. And then even though she has to kill one without a weapon, she tries to grab Saul's lightsaber as well. And I wonder if that ties into the fact that the Sith need to sort of steal a lightsaber to bleed the crystal. They can't just be given one. I know Kat's probably read that comic book. I don't know what your thoughts were on that, Kat, and your thoughts on how she was maybe trying to grab the lightsabers, but obviously didn't manage to. But like, why was she trying to do that?
Absolutely. I think there is a great possibility that she is intending to steal a lightsaber to take that crystal in order to bleed it and form a red crystal for a different lightsaber that May would then build herself. We also don't quite know what the Acolyte, her master, wants her to do in order to kill these 4 Jedi. And I was just wondering if, for one of the Jedi, she actually has to disarm them of their weapon before she kills them. If she tried to do that with Indara and then she was trying to do it with Saul. But I think it was very deliberate in both cases, that she's either trying to get the lightsaber for a reason or just trying to disarm them, perhaps to get closer to be able to attack them more safely, knowing that she then can't be attacked by their lightsaber.
Quite possibly. And then, am I right in thinking that in that comic book where we see sort of Darth Vader day one almost, and Palpatine says, I can't just give you a lightsaber because it'll bleed, you have to take it. So I wonder if, I'm not saying that her master, this Sith apprentice who we assume has told her to take one, but maybe if she turns up with one, look, I've actually managed to steal one, then maybe it speeds her process along and actually becoming sort of the next in line. Chris, I don't know what your thoughts were. So I know you like your martial arts movies and your movies in general. Obviously, something quite deliberate that we missed. But looking back, I think you do quite deliberately see her trying to grab the lightsabers from both their waists and obviously not be able to grab it. I suppose it was very on purpose and very in plain sight.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely focused on that 2 times. So I think there's definitely more to it. It wasn't just a quick cutaway. They're going to come back to it. There's going to be some meaning behind it. And I think the best lead we have right now is that comic where, we see that Darth Vader's got to, disarm a Jedi by that point, I should say, and then, bleed their crystal. But I wonder, it depends on how much they're going to dive into kind of the Sith processes. Because if they are, it's going to be a very different back half of the season, because it's all been very Jedi focused thus far, really, in terms of the main narrative that we're following. But it'll be interesting to see if they explain it, if this is something that's, a future, potential season 2 type of thing. I mean, I don't know if you guys know, and I don't, is this a standalone series? Has it not been revealed?
It hasn't been revealed yet, so it is currently a standalone series, but I believe Leslie Headland, who's the showrunner, has hinted at like the possibility of multiple seasons should they decide to do that, I think. But it has not been announced that it's going to be ongoing into a season 2 yet.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, narratively, you would kind of want to take a lightsaber away from a Jedi. That makes kind of sense. But on the other side of it, they seem to be doing a pretty good job with the hand-to-hand combat as well, or at least Carrie-Anne Moss was. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they come back to with that.
Definitely. And the second thing I want to talk about, which actually is sort of, it's answered in episode 3, but I wanted to bring it up, was that I think there's a line where Saul talks about like, you know, like me and your mothers are gone, and it would term mothers, and I was like, does that mean like she's from a, you know, from a same-sex couple, you know, or does it mean, are they talking about mothers as in, we know the mothers are like, is a term in the witch culture of Star Wars, you know, Mother Talzin, the great mothers in the Ahsoka series who were on that witch planet. So we'll go to you, Kat. I know obviously, you know, you're a big fan of sort of the witches of Star Wars. First, and I know it's been answered in this episode, but when that was mentioned in episode 1 or 2, which one it was, about when he mentioned the term mothers, like, what was your thoughts going into that? Were you like thinking, oh, is it the general term for like coven of witches, or were you thinking maybe it's actually May and Osha's parentage is a same-sex couple?
To be fair, it's so regular in the High Republic literature, whether that's the comics or the books, for characters within this era to have mothers, fathers, or even non-binary parents, that it didn't even particularly register with me when Saul said mothers. It seemed perfectly normal for this new era that the Star Wars lore has created throughout the books and the different phases. But I think it's this double meaning, really. Yes, it's representing May and Osha's actual mothers, and it's also probably referring to the witches and their culture. So I think it was a great little Easter egg that was hinting then at what unfolds in this episode, which we get answered pretty fully.
It certainly was. And I think before we dive into episode 3, which is called Destiny, obviously, as I said, Kat, you weren't here for episodes 1 and 2 last week, so just talk us through your insights and how much you loved, and just give us your lowdown on episodes 1 and 2 of The Acolyte, please.
I was so excited for The Acolyte because my exams ran up until the end of May, literally the last few days of May. So the thought of The Acolyte premiere was what was keeping me going throughout my revision, and it was so amazing. The opening 2 episodes just blew me away. I think what really stood out for me was just the sheer depth of the worlds, and every single planet had a unique visual style, unique costumes, so many different aliens, and it felt like Star Wars, but you could also tell that we're in a totally different era of Star Wars than we're used to seeing on screen. And the setting up of the mystery was brilliantly done. Obviously, there are loads of questions just from those 2 opening episodes, and it set up a fantastic, I think, pathway for what the remainder of the series will show us. And yeah, I am really excited because I love the High Republic, and I've read most of the books, all of the comics. And what really made me happy was my mum and I were watching it together. She doesn't know anything about the High Republic apart from me going on about Marcion Rowe. But she really loved it as well and totally understood the story beats. So even people who haven't read the comics or the books, it's clearly also working for them as well.
Just before we dive a bit more, so like, who's best then, Marcion Rowe or Kylo Ren?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to say Kylo Ren, but Marcion Rowe is probably my second favorite Star Wars villain.
He's pretty cool. let's dive into episode 3. So, episode 3, it was called Destiny. I thought we were going to get like double titles for all the episodes, so this was a bit different because episode 1 was of course called Lost and Found. Episode 2 was Revenge Justice. The sort of words that are the opposite of each other type of thing. Like a nice juxtaposition there. But then episode 3 is just called Destiny. As I said, it aired on June the 11th if you're on the American continent. Here in Europe and in the UK, it aired on June the 12th in the morning. It was directed by Kogo Nara, and it was written by Jasmine Flournoy and Eileen Shim. And this episode sort of takes us back in time. So it goes 16 years before the first episode, and the episode spends its entire time in that time frame. So we begin to sort of get a few things hinted at, a few answers, but also more questions. And I'm just going to give a rundown of the episode now. So it's 16 years earlier, Osha and May live with an all-female coven of witches on Brendok. The coven's leader, Mother Anasea, claims the twins were without a father and they were carried by another witch, Mother Coral. It's also insinuated later that Mother Anasia sort of perhaps used the Force maybe to create the twins. Anasea teaches the children that the Force, which she calls the thread, can be misused by other Force users, maybe hinting at the Jedi, and that they're going to undergo a ceremony soon to be inducted into the Coven, which May is excited for, but Osha is not. Before Osha is inducted, the ceremony is interrupted by a group of Jedi, and this is the Jedi that we've met previously, so it is Indara, Kelnaka, Torben, and Sol. Obviously, Torben is a Padawan. Obviously, we've seen him as a Jedi Knight in the previous episode, and Torben is Indara's Padawan. They express concern that the witches are training children and claim the right to test the twins for their suitability to become Jedi. Anasea asks the children to purposely fail the test. May does, but Osha chooses to pass the test and tells Anasea that she wishes to become a Jedi, which she seems to take well. May, on the other hand, does not. She's angry that her sister wants to leave her. May starts a fire. There's definitely other things going on. Sol helps Osha get to safety, and they see May and the other witches seemingly die and find the rest of the coven dead. The Jedi take Osha to Coruscant, and Sol promises to train her as his Padawan. And on Brendok, May is shown to have survived and is looking for her sister. So I suppose we'll start off just talking about the Witches Coven and sort of how that's introduced and how it's portrayed. And we'll start with you, Kat. Just your thoughts on sort of this little group of witch society we have going on Brendok.
It was really interesting. It's very reminiscent of the Night Sisters and the other mountain clan we just recently saw in Tales of the Empire. But another thing that interested me about these witches is their robes. They're wearing these beautiful purple flowing robes that seem very reminiscent of a people called the Yakombi in the High Republic Phase 2 comics. Now, the Yakombi we don't know a ton about, but we do know that they were Force users who weren't aligned with the dark side, but did use more perhaps dark side associated powers certainly than the Jedi. And they fight and was sort of trained in a way that seems quite similar to how May was fighting in the previous episodes. So I was just wondering if maybe the witches and this witch coven are a descendant of the Yakombi, or even perhaps a direct link to those characters from the comics, because it's all set within a very similar timeline at this point. And yeah, it's really interesting because they're never named, and I do find it interesting that all the other witches we've seen so far throughout Star Wars have been given names, but this coven remains very much anonymous.
Yeah, and something I thought was that there similarities to the Dathomirian witches. I thought, I think the fact that they, they had bows and arrows, although they weren't like plasma or using magic. It was, they're very much old-fashioned bow and arrows, but so that was quite similar. But I thought there was quite differences. I thought the way they used the Force and like the way they posed and used their hands and the way the way they compressed the Force was very much seemed how the Jedi and Sith do it, less and less like how the Dathomirians do it. So I thought there was enough here to sort of say, yes, like there are Covenant witches, and we'll show you some similarities to Dathomir, but also they're very different. We didn't see any sort of green flame, you know what I mean? Things like that, And something else I noticed as well was obviously the Acolyte logo with the O being sort of two different O's in symbolism. And that's obviously the symbol of the twins, but also the power during the ceremony came from like, it was almost like two planets in the distance that were sort of mirroring each other. I don't know if anyone spotted that.
Yeah.
Chris, what were your thoughts on this coven of witches? Obviously, I know I'm not saying you've dealt with witches on Dystopian Simulation Radio, but I imagine that type of a cult type behavior you've definitely covered. So, like, what was your thoughts seeing it depicted in Star Wars?
Oh, well, we've definitely covered some witches, well, for want of a better term, real witches, on Dystopian Simulation Radio. But here, yeah, it was interesting to see, especially, we're not, well, I suppose we're a year out, but I mean, to me, it doesn't feel that far away from Ahsoka, where we were very much dealing with the Night Sisters. And it was interesting to see they brought a few, if you'll excuse the pun, common threads between the two, especially, this referring to a thread, the Force using it as a thread, which of course they brought up in the Ahsoka show as well. Now, I didn't get the impression that this cult were Night Sisters. And obviously this is set in a different era, but they could either be, somehow related. This is one of the central mysteries, obviously, but it seems interesting that he used a lot of similar kind of imagery, but they don't seem to be Night Sisters at all. They certainly seem. I mean, we get that hint, don't we? That they are now exiled. They were persecuted. They've escaped to somewhere supposedly safe, although not that safe as the Jedi found them.
Yeah, let's talk about the setting. So they obviously live in that fortress, but inside that fortress there's obviously some sort of like giant power cells or something. And then, so I don't know what they're doing with that, but also, I mean, one of the mysteries that the night before the Jedi find them, so the night before the ceremony, when they're talking about the ceremony, and like they hear something, and then I believe it is Mother Coral goes to check on it, and like there's some clanking going on, and something doesn't seem right in that big power cell engine area. I don't know if anyone thought maybe was somebody tinkering with that, like then.
I hadn't. Yeah, now you mention it, actually, I hadn't actually picked up on that. But there's definitely other things afoot that we're not seeing from this perspective in this episode.
Can't they do spot that the night before the ceremony? That something maybe wasn't right in that sort of big power generator room.
Absolutely, because I thought when Anastasia tells Coral to take the children, that the Jedi were actually going to appear at that very moment when they were training. But nothing comes of that particular scene apart from the girls going to bed, and it is like this mini cliffhanger within the episode because it seems that something was going on that the mothers were hiding from the girls.
Definitely, and like I said, I believe it is Mother Coral actually goes into that room, and like you see, sort of it doesn't sound quite right in there. I mean, I don't know how it's meant to sound, but like I don't know why you would show us in there the night before the fire's going to happen, and then during the fire, again, the fire's like up in the building, and then somehow all our power generators get destroyed. So I think maybe there's something else going on here. I don't necessarily think it's the Jedi either. I suppose the biggest part of this episode is Osha and May, and sort of seeing how they were as kids, certainly opposites, and then like seeing how they're a bit different. I'll start with you, Kat. As obviously just we get to see May as a child here, and certainly bits where she seems a little bit evil, where she's torturing animals with the Force, and like she's a bit vindictive towards her sister at times. I don't know what your thoughts were between Osha and May's dynamic.
I thought it was very well portrayed. Both actresses were absolutely amazing in every scene they did, and the dynamic they portrayed of May and Osha's similar but respectively very different personalities was so well done. Absolutely hats off to them. And it's interesting that you mentioned the animal cruelty, because that is something that does appear quite young if there are psychopathic tendencies within a personality. That is usually displayed quite early during childhood, and that does seem to be what May is appearing to do when she's gripping that moth-like creature using the force and quite violently holding it still compared to Osha, who's much more delicately practicing her powers with these creatures. And these differences in their personalities are something that only seem to be highlighted more and more throughout the episode, that however much Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral are trying to get the girls to be the same, be together, and to be as one, it's not necessarily working. May and Osha are very different. They're unique individuals, as are any twins. There is no type of sibling who is going to be the exact same as another sibling. And this sort of pulling apart of their destiny threads throughout the episode was fascinating to watch. And Osha's desire for independence from her sister, no matter how much she loves May, this desire for independence is really what's driving her. And the sibling dynamic was just, yeah, it was just really interesting to see, because I think it really explains a lot of the way Osha was acting in the previous episodes, and the way sort of she reacts to seeing May for the first time again. There was already this sort of literally broken bridge between them just through what happened in their childhood, even before Osha realized that May was doing something terrible.
Yeah. And then something else I want to talk about is that, we see when Mother Anastasia goes to use the force on them, and then like May sort of defends the force back, and then Osha's very much hiding behind May, like May is protecting her. So although there's a lot of times in this episode where it looks like May shows disdain for her sister Osha, there's this moment where actually like she protects her, which was quite interesting. Chris, I don't know what your thoughts were on Osha and May's dynamic and sort of seeing how the witches dealt with kids, I suppose.
Yeah, it was. I mean, to take the second part of that first, they seemed very respectful of the kids. They seem, when they come back to the village after being caught by their mother outside, everybody's kind of bowing to them, showing respect, because they know that the ascension's coming, and presumably they're gonna, whatever that actually means, whether it means that they jump up a rank or that they become a full witch or something, whatever, they're being paid respect to. And as the girls themselves point out later in the episode, they're the only girls in the village. They're the only children around at all. So I think everyone's quite grateful that they're able to somehow, and we don't know how yet, continue on this brood that they have. But they're it's interesting to see the dynamic between the two, because clearly, well, May seems quite, I don't want to say dark side tendencies, but she's the one. She's definitely the kind of the budding serial killer of the bunch. She is, quite happy to torture animals. When it comes to the crux point, she says that she'll kill her sister. Now, is this her, or is she being controlled by another entity at this point? We don't know, but from what we're seeing here, from this point of view, a certain point of view, if you will, it seems that May is definitely more into the whole being a witch thing, and a bit more okay with being evil. than her sister is. Her sister seems far more sort of head in the clouds, Luke Skywalker. I want to go off and I want to save the galaxy. I want to see the galaxy. I don't want to stay here on this backwater world type of thing. Whereas her sister is very much, no, I want to stay here and I want to be here with my mothers. So they've continued that on to adulthood to some degree, but obviously we know that that Osha ultimately ends up leaving the Jedi Order. So it's going to be an interesting journey to see. We've got a lot of missing pieces in this puzzle right now. So I'm interested to see what comes in the in the next couple of episodes, so we can fill these in potentially from other people's point of view.
Definitely. I mean, let's just dive into the fire. So, after they find out that Osha wants to be a Jedi, sort of May sets fire to the book that Osha been drawn Jedi in, but then somehow sets the whole doorway on fire. And that leads to this whole massacre where the fire spreads and the power generators I mentioned before like blow up, even though the fire's not down in that area. And then obviously when Saul saves Osha, and they go past sort of the dead witches, the witches are just like lying there dead, like they weren't killed by fire and they weren't killed by explosion. So like what do we think is going on here? I suppose we'll go to you first, Kat.
This is where that certain point of view comes into play really heavily, and it's the Rashomon effect all over again. We've seen it before in Star Wars, but it's much more central to the storyline than I think it's been previously in Star Wars storytelling. There is no way that May's little fire of burning that book set the whole place alight. I mean, there's just no way. Yes, she's angry and she's burning Osha's drawings, but how did that fire spread across stone and metal to then blow up the entire fortress? It just doesn't make sense. And the speed at which it spreads doesn't make sense either. There must be something else at play to be able to cause that much damage. And yes, exactly as you said, those witches do not have any burns on them. And there is a lot of ventilation. I'd be very surprised if that was carbon monoxide. But at the same time, they also don't have any lightsaber marks. There's no wounds. So whatever happened, were they force choked? Were they asphyxiated through the force and containing fumes in the air? I don't know. But while Osha blames May for what happened, I don't think it was May's angry burning of the drawings that brought that entire fortress down.
Definitely. And I think there's a bit where May and Osha come face to face on like opposite sides of a bridge. And like May's acting a certain way until the bridge nearly collapses again. And then she almost like starts acting more caring. And to me it was almost like Jekyll and Hyde, like bipolar, or maybe someone was maybe possessing you and then wasn't all of a sudden. I don't know what your thoughts were on sort of on May's actions like that. And there's times after episode she did that where like, maybe, similar to how in the in the prequel trilogy, how Palpatine sort of is grooming Anakin from a young age, right? And from the shadows out, no one realizes until it's too late. I wonder if maybe this Sith apprentice is already grooming May at this stage and is actually on the planet and present. Maybe that's who was sneaking around in that power bay the night before. Maybe that's who's killed these witches, and maybe that's who's like allowed the fire to spread further. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
Well, we know that Osha was sneaking off to spend time alone. She liked going to that beautiful tree we see in the opening of the episode to draw, collect her thoughts, and that she had been doing this for some time. She had been getting away from May, getting away from the Coven. So what was May doing during the time that OSHA wasn't around? It could very well be that she had also found somebody to meet who was some kind of dark side influence on her, and that might help to explain the sheer dichotomy in their personalities. But there definitely seems to be points where May is very angry, but then seems to regret her actions. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was an external force that's driving May's more aggressive emotional reactivity, because yeah, she seems to have a few differences.
I don't know what your thoughts were, Chris, on sort of on what was going on, and like how, you know, there's definitely more players at play here, I think, than just the Jedi and the witches.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something going on behind this. There's an element that we are not seeing right now, and I think, you know, as Kat pointed out, that those bodies, there's no lightsaber marks, there's no rubble next to them. There's, you know, it's not even like you know, they're a cult and they've all drank a poison, because they've got no cups next to them, unless they had a poison space cream or something like that. There's too many missing pieces from this to make sense of it at this point. I think May's very interesting in how she's acting, because she, at times, she seems like she wants to protect Osha during the scene, and other times she just seems to be outright out to kill her. But there's no way that a fire would spread that quickly over, you know, rock and metal and so on. Or if it is, you've got terrible safety standards on this planet that you've got out there, and you should probably rethink this. But it's I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at this point there was already a dark side user and May was under their spell to some degree, because it's just, it doesn't seem, even for a jealous sibling, it doesn't seem right that you're going to destroy absolutely everything. I mean, she could have just killed her sister, but she didn't. She chose to set this fire, which spreads at an astronomical rate, and then before we know it, everybody in the entire coven's dead. There's something else going on.
Definitely. Let's move our thoughts to the Jedi, and we'll go to you first, Kat. Just like, what's your thoughts on, I suppose, the four Jedi we see here, Andorra, Kalmaka, Tobin, and Sol, and what's your thoughts on how the Jedi are portrayed throughout the episode?
They are portrayed in a very interesting way. We're seeing perhaps the start of the Jedi we're more used to seeing during the prequel era. There's this arrogance to the Jedi when they arrive on Brendok, basically demanding that the mothers give over Osha and May for testing as Padawans. And there's no real reason for them to be there, because this is apparently a distant planet that there's not really supposed to be anyone living on. The Coven appears to be in somewhat hiding, and the girls are clearly safe. They're being trained as Force users within the Coven, and really they're just keeping to themselves. So for the Jedi to turn up and announce demanding to test the children, it seems very arrogant, and they are being led by hubris, almost not accepting other ways of channeling and tuning into the Force. So, yeah, I've got to admit, I didn't like the way Indara was coming across in this episode. She seemed like an invader, and intruding upon this coven and upon this very important ascension when the Jedi didn't really have any right to be on Brendok. So it does not really put the Jedi in the most favourable of lights. They would probably argue that they were doing it for the good of the children, that being a Jedi is a powerful calling. But I think the way they came in demanding just didn't seem like the Jedi way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's times when like when they first turned up, they were quite arrogant. Then they dialed it back, and then the way that the Mother Anastasia said, "Oh well, yes, you can test him." It was quite a strange thing. I wonder if why are the Jedi here on this planet? They said that they thought that the planet was uninhabited. They've obviously had a tip that something's going on here. So is the tip just to see what the witches are doing, or have they had a tip that there's maybe some force sensitive children? But they're here for a reason, I suppose. So yeah, very interesting. Let's talk about the twins' birth. So, Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral have a conversation where Mother Coral says she carried the children, so she birthed the children, and that was Mother Anastasia who helped create them using the Force, and that they're very scared about the Jedi find out about that. So, do we think that? I mean, they've obviously been created using the Force, I believe. Do we think that it's just Mother Anastasia knows how to do that, or is this like other Sith here, like trying out and testing how to make Anakin later on? Let's go to you, Kat. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's important to remember that the Sith did not create Anakin. The Force created Anakin in response to the Sith presence becoming stronger. If you've read the novel Darth Plagueis, then it's sort of outlined that as Plagueis and Palpatine are increasing in their powers and increasing their dark side abilities, that the Force responds by creating Anakin. So there is a difference between what Anastasia did and how Anakin was created. But we also know from that book, Darth Plagueis, that Plagueis knew how to create life, which sounds like what Mother Anastasia did. So if this is a power that can be learned, then it kind of explains why Mother Anastasia is so concerned about the Jedi, because she repeats throughout this episode how she is worried about power and who wields such power. So if the Coven are hiding because of the girls and this ability that Anastasia has learned or developed, then it would explain perhaps why the Jedi are there, that there may be a dark side presence there. But it is just important to note that the way Anakin was created is just not the same way as the girls have been created.
Yeah. Chris, what's your thoughts on sort of the twins and how they were created?
Well, again, there's more going on here, but it's all hinted at. These girls have come around through unnatural means, as they put it in the episode. There is this is again feeding in. I think that there's some sort of dark side presence around that's offered some kind of exchange to the group of this coven, and kind of maybe they pitched it as a win-win. It's like, hey, you get children, you get to continue on your your group for whatever reason, but when they're of age, we want them and we want to do X, Y, and Z with them. But is it the fact that they've been purposely trying to create a forced children, or have they been trying to purposely create a forced dyad?
Quite possibly. I mean, Kat, you're our expert on dyads.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. And it has crossed my mind of whether Osha and May are a dyad. I mean, it would make a lot of sense. And one is more drawn to the dark side, one is more drawn to the light side. The two need to be together to balance themselves out. And when they're not together, May falls completely to the dark side. I would be very excited if it was a dyad, because that is Jedi lore, Force lore that could be explored in so much more depth in this series and explain Rey and Ben's dyad further. But it would make sense if the twins were that dyad, the Sith were, or the dark side. I mean, the Sith aren't necessarily around at this point. It's dark side Force users, people who are meddling with a darker power of the Force. And if they were attempting to create a dyad, perhaps in the hope of creating a Sith, I mean, while we have a dyad, there's also the rule of two, and partly what we've seen from the trailers is May reciting some of the Sith code. So there's a lot of threads that could be pulled to explain this element of the twins.
There certainly is. I think diving on from that sort of, we see the witches use the Force to sort of push and pull people. We see Mother Anastasia use the Force to sort of mark May with her marking on her forehead. We know that Mother Anastasia has used the Force to maybe perhaps create life. We also see, and I'm assuming it's Mother Anastasia uses the Force to sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of possess Padawan Tobin. I don't know what your thoughts were, Kat, when you first seen that happen.
That was crazy. That came out of nowhere. It had been pointed out that something happens in the trailer, but for Mother Anastasia to do that, it suggests an ability that is more aligned with the dark side of the Force, because she threatens to basically like wipe Tobin's memories, to sort of completely mess up his brain, which is a very dark power. It's sort of like how we've seen other Force users getting into people's minds to read their thoughts, to see their past, but Anastasia was sort of using that power to completely override Tobin's identity, his consciousness. And the way Indara reacts, Indara is sort of what is the interesting sort of key to this scene, because does she see the Coven as a threat after Anastasia using that power on Tobin? I mean, it is quite the threat, and it's a threat to the Jedi.
Yeah, so it's almost like, we thought it would be a bit tricky, but we've come to test the children. But now you've done that, I'm probably definitely going to report that back to the council, that like someone was able to do this to one of us, and like, do they need to be sorted out? What was your thoughts on Kelnaka, Chris? Obviously, he seemed quite a common in presence, I thought, and particularly when he was sort of talking to Osha, he seemed very like a nice big furry smiley guy.
That's one way of describing him. Yeah, he seemed kind of the opposite of the way we saw him in the very end of the second episode, where he's screaming at some guys to get away from his house, for want of a better word.
And he's being Shrek.
Yeah, get out of my swamp. But he's very much, he seems very kind of cool, calm, and collected, which is not necessarily how all Wookiees are described, but it's quite cool. He's kind of the cool guy at the back of the room. It's like, he doesn't have to do anything right now, but when he does it, it's going to be really cool. You just got to wait for that. We did get to see some bits of him during this episode, though. We got to see him tinkering with, for want of a better word, a type of speeder bike, which I'm not really sure necessarily why he was doing that, but he was doing that, and it was a nice little chance for him and Osha to connect, and also maybe kind of sparked Osha's interest in mechanics, and maybe kind of leads her on ultimately to have a career as being a mechanic. But the other thing I noticed was he seems to have something which at least I have never seen before in a Wookiee, but I haven't seen or read all of the High Republic novels, but he seemed to have a shaved head with some like markings drawn on his head. Did you notice that?
I did not, but Kat might have done.
No, I didn't either, and so now I have an excuse to rewatch the episode because I did not see that.
Yeah, it was a bit difficult to see in some of the scenes. I'm just going to bring it up for me again just to double check, but it's definitely there in the scene with the where he's fixing the speeder bike. He's got some very sort of like light blue. I'm not sure if you call them tattoos or if they're markings on his head, but they're definitely something that we haven't, at least I have never seen from a Wookiee before.
I
Very
wonder if it
interesting.
represents like different Wookiee clans or something on Kashyyyk.
Or
Possibly.
maybe,
Do you think
maybe
he'd
he
be
was
able?
saved from like the slave trade or something.
Possibly. Although I'm not sure if he has it in the kind of present day, if you will, from what we saw him in the last episode. I'm not sure if he'd grown it out. I'll go back and have a check, but I'm just bringing it up on screen right now, and yeah, he's definitely got some kind of markings. They look more like tattoos versus scars, though. He's got a sort of samurai ponytail, but then he's definitely got some markings on his head.
Awesome stuff. We'll have to try and analyze those and see if they say something or mean anything. With them fixing the speeder bike, does anybody think maybe the Jedi been here for, not a long time, but more than a few days? They've got the big ship, they've got a base camp set up. He's fixing a speeder bike. Like, it seems like maybe they've been scanning the planet for a while and checking the place out.
Definitely. I think the way that encampment was built did suggest that the Jedi had been there certainly for at least a few days because the mothers know that the Jedi are present. That's why Coral came looking for May and Osha. But the fact that Kalnaka was fixing that speeder or tuning it up, whatever he was doing to it, suggests that they had been using it. You wouldn't just come out on a mission with a dodgy speeder bike. So if something had happened to it, then they must have been patrolling the woods or looking round, whether that's for a potential dark side presence, whether it was in their search for the girls. But if the Jedi had been tipped off, it does raise that big question of how did they know the coven was on Brendock?
Indeed, especially with it. Again, they say that Brendock's supposedly uninhabited, but they're there for a reason on an uninhabited planet. So very, very interesting. And I suppose last but not least in the Jedi, we've seen a clip in the TV spots where Kalnaka sort of jumps over Padawan Torben and ignites the lightsaber type of thing. So do we think that happens during this whole fire incident at the Coven's base, or do we think it's something different? We'll go to you first, Chris.
I think it would make sense for that to happen. We've already seen that, at least one Jedi's been possessed by, for one, dark side power, at that site. So it would make very much a lot of sense for Kalnaka to also be possessed at that point. So yeah, I think that there's some bigger event that's happened, and maybe next week when things are revealed or the weeks that come we'll go back, but it feels very much like we're talking, we've got sort of chapter 1, chapter 7 and chapter 9, but we're missing everything in the middle that's going to tell us how we get places.
Definitely. Kat, what's your thoughts on sort of that hinted sequence between Torben and Kalnaka and where it could take place?
Well, if you look at Torben when Anasea does possess him, Torben's face is completely unscarred. But at the end of the episode, he's carrying that scar across his eye that we then see when May is talking to him. And it's very fresh at that moment. This scar is almost bright red, and it does look like a scar from a lightsaber. So if Kalnaka was possessed and unconsciously attacked Torben, that would explain the scar across his face. Something happened for Torben to get injured.
Definitely. And I feel that, say if Mother Anasea has took control of Kalnaka to attack Torben, then that would give the Jedi reason enough to kill her to stop the possession from happening.
it would. And Mother Coral is also noticeably absent from the bodies that we see.
Do we think Mother Coral could be linked to the Sith?
I don't know, but was she unhappy with Anastasia willingly going along with the Jedi and willingly letting Osha go?
Yeah. Moving on from that, obviously we end with sort of Saul sort of being a comforter for Osha and says, if she wants it, she'll be his Padawan, which reminded me of when like Obi-Wan took Anakin like without the approval of the council. He's obviously not going to ask the council, and I suppose that Indora is the leading Jedi on the mission, it seems like, and he says it without referencing her either. What did you make of sort of Saul and Osha's conversation and embrace at the end of the episode, Chris?
It seemed very guilt-ridden. It seemed very much like Saul was trying to make up for something by kind of, offering everything that he could, which in that case was kind of, to take her on as a student. I think Saul seems, from at least what we've been presented with so far, a genuinely good man. And I'm wondering if he had to take part in something that went against his morals and maybe the Jedi's moral codes as well. And he's trying to revert hard back in the other direction on the spaceship to try and atone for any sins that might have occurred down on that planet.
Indeed. Kat, have you got anything you want to add about that point or any other points about the episode?
I think the only thing I'll probably point out is, one, I absolutely love Master Soul. He is amazing. Love his character. But that was an element of the Jedi that was less bureaucratic during the High Republic era. You see a lot of Jedi Knights, Jedi Masters just saying, yeah, you can be my Padawan. Let's do this. You don't have to go through a load of paperwork with the council at this point to take on a Padawan. Which is interesting because Osha is, compared to the prequel era, quite old to be a Padawan.
That was my thoughts about, like, the Jedi are quite hesitant of Anakin. I mean, I think they're hesitant because Qui-Gon has found him and they don't necessarily like Qui-Gon. And I mean that in a nice way. Like, they don't necessarily, like, when Qui-Gon comes to the council, I think they're like, oh no, like, what problems Qui-Gon got today? That type of thing. So I think the upper height about that, then also the fact the child's too old. So he's too old, where he had, like, they're saying we want to test these children. Like, we're happy to test them because we might take them to be Jedi, and we know how old they are because we can see them. So yes, it's very different, isn't it? Very different culturally, sort of how we see the Jedi in the prequels. And obviously, in the prequels, the Jedi are on their downfall, I suppose. And this is maybe a little light of the better times, I suppose. I suppose talking about, one thing I thought at the end was that, let's just say the fire didn't happen, and the witches, because Mother Anastasia says that, we'll have to take it to the group and decide if you can go or not. Let's say they decide she could go. Osha would have went with the Jedi, but wouldn't have had, like, the tragedy on her mind, and maybe it would have ended differently. But obviously, because of what happened on Brandok, things happen differently, and she ends up leaving the Order. So quite interesting there. And I think the last thing from me really is that I honestly think something else is going on. Like, I know we've all hinted at, but, like, there's something, like, that big power generator in that room. It's very mechanical in a fortress that's very old school. And like what's it doing? Is it harnessing power? Is it creating power? Is it a factory? Like, is it hiding something? Like, what's that there for? And then, like I said, the night before the ceremony, something definitely happens in there where it gets tinkered with, and that is where Mother Coral is. She sees it. And then, like I said, when the fire happens, we go into that part of the fortress and, like, it explodes. And then, as we've said, we see a lot of the witches there that are dead, but how did they die? I want to talk about the tree that we see Osha sitting on at the beginning of the episode when she's on her own, where she goes for, her solo walks and to sort of be free of everybody. and it's also the same tree that May journeys to at the end of the episode because she's looking for her sister. It has sort of yellow, very light green or yellow leaves. I wonder if those leaves are similar to the leaves that are in the poison that they make to kill Tobin. Maybe they turn like a darker green once they've been picked. I don't know if anyone picked up on that and how maybe it could be similar.
We've got the same name, right? If it's a bunta tree, and that was the name of the poison they used the last episode.
Oh, there you go. So I missed that name connection, but I spotted the imagery.
Which I don't know if it's a reference to Bunta's Eve on the pod the day of the pod racing celebration in episode 1, but maybe.
Quite possibly. Kat, do you think obviously that tree is where the poison comes from that kills Tobin?
Oh yes, absolutely. OSHA says it's a poison specifically from Brendock, and the girls mention right at the start that the tree is dangerous if it's ingested. So it's clearly the poison. I mean, trees often represent life. So for this tree to be poisonous and representing death is interesting connotation.
It is indeed. And so we've seen what this poison can do because we see Tobin drinks it and dies in episode 2, yeah? What if the witches have been poisoned? Because we don't see them on fire and we don't see lightsaber marks. So what if they've been poisoned by their own poison?
I mean, it's probably a leading theory thus far. That, as I pointed out a little bit earlier, there didn't seem to be any cups or anything next to them. So, maybe that's something that maybe it was ingested some other way. Maybe it was laced into something. Maybe.
I mean, if they had eaten at that point, maybe it was in their food.
Was it in the spice creams?
Oh no!
I wouldn't touch those with a barge pole.
Oh.
Well, not to mention as well, like up to this point, the only time we've ever heard spice used as like a synonym for drugs. So I wouldn't be touching those spice creams, not unless you want to go on a great trip.
Yeah, I wonder if the spice creams are like Amsterdam brownies.
Yeah.
Like, who knows, I suppose. StarWars.com also has a recipe to make spice creams. Obviously drug-free. That's up there now. So that's quite cool. Chris, anything that we haven't discussed about the episode that you want to discuss or about the Acolyte in general?
I think a couple of things that I wanted to bring up that we haven't touched on was, what did you make of these markings that those who have ascended in the cult end up with on their heads?
So I didn't see these on anyone else, so I don't know if... Obviously, Mother Anastasia has that marking. I didn't see it anyone else, and then she obviously gave it to me and was probably going to give the same one to Osha, probably on the other side of her forehead. So obviously Mother Anastasia's is in the centre of her forehead. May's was to one side and was May's going to be at the other, but I didn't see it on anybody else, so I thought it was quite interesting. I don't know what you think, Morgan's Cat.
Yeah, the fact that they were circles, that sort of seemed perhaps to tie into the power of many circles, like a never-ending line, and that it's shared. The power is shared. There's no points of focus, like the round table. There's no one leader. It's everyone is equal, but it could also perhaps be some kind of representation of the moons as well, especially if Osha and May's tattoos were going to be like the opposite sides of Mother Anastasia's. It was sort of going to create that moon pattern. But yeah, I don't think every witch had it on the head at least. So maybe that represents that, like Anastasia's line, and that she's the head witch, the leader of the coven, and then her children also bear the marks because they will then be the next leaders.
Indeed, Mother Anastasia seemed to be like, obviously she is the leader, the dominant one, but then also it seemed to be Mother Coral who had the most like anger about things, which was quite strange, and obviously disagreed about certain things. So it was very, very interesting.
It's a bit of a clash between the two, I think, in in general, but not least in parenting style. I mean, maybe I'm looking at this as a parent myself, but Mother Coral seems absolutely sick of being the bad cop when she goes and brings the girls back. And then, her partner's just like, no, give them space creams. It's fine. It's no problem. And she's just like, are you seriously doing this again? Like,
Yeah, no, there's definitely
just no, I'm not being the bad cop again. And yeah, so they seem to have a definite, again, excuse a pun, bit of a push and pull between the two of them. They seem to be very much, caring towards each other, but they've got some serious philosophical differences going on. And I wonder if that maybe is what's played into what's happened behind the scenes that we're not yet privy to.
Yeah, Kat, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on sort of on Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral's like relationship and how it did seem very much like a push and pull, as Chris has said.
Yeah, I totally agree with Chris there that there is this push and pull. There's this constant disagreement between them. I mean, in some scenes, they appear a very happy couple, and I think there's a deep-rooted love between the two of them. But Mother Coral seemed very frustrated with Anastasia's leadership, and I don't think even Mother Coral would have wanted Osha's request to go to like the Witches' Council. I think she would have said, no, Osha remains here on the planet, on Brendok with us. And Mother Anastasia seems much more sort of, I wouldn't say kinder, but she seems more perhaps open-minded to the idea of one of their own leaving the coven. Maybe she's a bit more of a renegade. And perhaps that's what Mother Coral is struggling with. She's used to perhaps the coven being led in a certain way, whereas Anastasia is much more of a renegade in her thoughts and leadership style. But I do feel that even though Coral loves Anastasia, that there could be treason from Coral towards specifically Anastasia, and then maybe it goes wrong, and that's how the whole coven ends up dead.
Quite possibly, I think. Mother Anastasia seems to be more like, she talks about destiny and talks about, if the force presents itself, then you've got to pull the thread and see where it goes for your destiny. And so, if Osha's experience is talking about the Jedi and wanting to explore that, she's already talked about pulling the thread. So she's sort of standing by her beliefs that, yeah, you pull that thread then, Osha. And she says, we're not going to see each other again if you do that, but that doesn't mean don't do it, I suppose. And again, back to the name, the episode title is just one word, Destiny, where the previous episodes have been double-barreled. Again, I think it's just one because it's like, if you look at it like the first episode's called Lost Found, I think May and Osha are very much like lost and found and then like swap over during that episode. The second one, Revenge and Justice, I think one's trying to seek revenge and one's trying to seek justice. And how they think about that. And this one's just called Destiny. And it's only one word. And it's like, no, this is the destiny of May and Osha being set in motion, I suppose, by what happens here on Brendok. Chris, I know you had some other things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So, what I was wondering, just to go back to the ascension scene. This is where I had a little bit of a wobble with the episode. I came back to it, but I don't know. I thought I wasn't so keen, and I don't know why, but I wasn't so keen on that chant that they were doing. It just took me out of the episode a little bit, and I came back to it towards the end, and especially once I kind of realized that maybe we weren't getting all of the perspectives, but I just wanted what everyone else thought. Feel free to disagree with me.
Was the
on
chant
this.
the power of one, the power of two, the power of many?
Yeah, I don't know if it was like when you say it there, Peter. It sounds fine. You could have done the episode maybe, but I don't know. It was just the cadence that it was coming out with. It just sounded a bit non-Star Warsy, and I don't exactly know what I mean by this, but there was just something that was bothering me about this scene.
It
I
reminded
think
me sort of.
well,
Sorry, Kat, you go ahead.
I think what I get where you're coming from. I like the message, and I definitely think when they say it, the power of one, the power of two, the power of many, it's very powerful. But it's the first time we've heard English or basic singing in Star Wars. Every time we've heard singing beforehand, it's always been in an alien language. And I think that's what felt really different about that moment.
You might be. Yeah, you know what? You might be right there, because I did also think that the score, I did notice that that came in English as well, when it repeats the chant, which, yeah, definitely that was one of the main things that took me out the scene. Whereas maybe if it had been in a completely alien language, it would have just kind of blended in.
Yeah, because you think about in Ahsoka when we open of Sabine getting away from Lafal on her speeder bike, that walk piece is sung in a completely alien language, and it really works in that moment. It sounds like something Sabine would be listening to on headphones. And I
Mhm.
think in this episode, what's so different is the fact that it is actually being sung or chanted in basic, and the backing music, the actual soundtrack, is also in English. And yeah, it's sort of, it does feel more real world rather than Star Wars in that particular moment.
Definitely, because I think Size Noodles, sings in a different language. I think the band that are playing in The Force Awakens and Master's Castle, that's not in English. I think the singer who is on um, the yacht in Solo Star Wars Story, obviously singing not in English. We can talk about the Clone Wars, what happens a lot in there. For me, it felt a little bit like almost Shakespearean witches, almost. Um, so I wouldn't say it took us out of it, but I did think about like Macbeth a little bit. I don't know why that's popped in my head when I was watching it, like Macbeth-ish esque, Shakespearean esque when it comes to the witches. One thing I did take out of it though was like when they were doing the chant, one of them was like shrieked a few times, like a hyena laugh, and like
Yes.
that did take me out of it when that happened. But I suppose if they're a strange witch cult, they'll do strange things.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts were about the laugh cat, or if you picked up on it.
Yeah, I did hear it. That kind of felt actually perhaps more more in tune for me, because if you listen to tribal culture, especially when there is chanting or singing, there often is a a high pitched cry or call. So that didn't feel necessarily strange compared to the music, but I think maybe it could have been tied together a little bit differently. If that backing track had been in an alien language, or even just or orchestral, perhaps it would have felt a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more Star Warsy.
Chris, what's next on your agenda?
No, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about from today's episode.
Fantastic. I've just got one more thing. Obviously, I think the budget for these episodes is around about the $22 million mark, so it's the most expensive TV show they've done. Obviously, it hasn't been shot on stagecraft or the volume, so it's on locations and sets. And I think that's evident throughout the 3 episodes we've seen. But I feel this set here of the fortress on Brendok, like you can really see the production value, and you can really see the benefits you get from actually using a real set. And I love the volume. I love stagecraft. Don't get us wrong. I think you use that for certain things, and you use this for certain things. But I think the decision to do that and the cost that goes along with it really pays off of just how good this set looked. Everything from the outside of it when they approach it to the girls' room to the outside balconies where they do the ceremony to that power plant room that we see. I thought it was just a very intricate and beautiful and well detailed set. That was really awesome. I don't know what your thoughts were, Kat, about how the sets looked.
Absolutely agree. In every episode, it's just, again, like you said, I love the volume. It The things that can be done on the volume are amazing, but when you can get these like wide pan shots of the landscape of a certain scene, like the girl's room, uh, it does really cement you within the moment. And get sort of perhaps more detail to the scene. And outside, especially in this episode, when they have the beautiful shots of the forest, oh, I just, yeah, I was in there in that moment because I love those scenes.
Chris, thoughts on how this show looks compared to others, maybe?
I mean, you can definitely get that real sense from it, and that's something that I think always helps Star Wars. It's that grounding in reality, even though we're in an absolutely fantastical world. So, I mean, I'm all for shooting on location, but there's certain times when the volume, I think, makes sense. But as with anything, as with CG and practical effects, the best is the best of both worlds, a mixing of the two things together. But I'm certainly enjoying the way that this is being presented. I have no complaints at all about the sets or about how the show looks at all. It's fantastic.
And then last thing from me, which ties into sort of the fortress and the set and how it looks. Obviously, the fortress looks pretty ancient and has been there a long time. It also looks like it's had other uses. You know, when you think about how Osha escapes, you know, she opens that hatch which goes somewhere. It seems like that hatch had a purpose once, but doesn't anymore. What is that room with the power generators in? Was it some sort of factory? Obviously, we know that the witch clan was sort of on the run and then like started living here. So I don't think they've been here as long as the fortress has. So do we feel maybe this fortress was used for something else in the past? And maybe is that why things are going wrong? I'm not saying it's a Sith temple or something like that, but you know, there's definitely something eerie about this place, and it's definitely something maybe ancient. I don't know. We'll go to you first, Kat.
If you look at the witches, they do seem to be quite non-technologically advanced. Their weapons are very simple. We've seen those bow and arrows, literal bow and arrows. There's no plasma, there's no energy driving them. It's very simplistic. They use bow staffs, and nothing about them suggests that there's lots of technology. This era of the High Republic, there is quite a bit of technology. There's droids, there's very good spacecraft. So it's not that the time period is limited, it just seems to be that the Coven doesn't use it. So I think they must have adopted this fortress. They found it, and clearly it was something else beforehand. I mean, from the outside, it almost looks like a dam in the way it curves across that mountain, but I don't actually think there's any water behind it. But its origin is clearly meant to be a mystery. And yeah, I'd like to know what it does, because there is an awful lot of technology in that fortress, and it had a big amount of power cells. I mean, inside looks like the Force Awakens. In the what was
Starkiller Base.
Yeah, where they had to blow it up for the shields.
When Mr. Handsome Poe flies in and takes care of it.
Yeah, that exact bit. Inside reminded me of that area, and that suggests it needs a lot of power. So yeah, I would be very interested to know who originally built the fortress, because it's definitely not this Coven.
Chris, thoughts on the fortress and what it could or couldn't be used for?
Well, it's like Kat points out, it's very interesting. It's a mountain, but it seems like it's a dam. So what, was it holding something back? What could it possibly be doing? Is it holding something in the mountain? Was it a mining operation? It seems like there is if you look closely, it seems like there's kind of a hollowed out V in the middle, and there's a kind of a central part that's kind of suspended in there. I'm not sure if that's where they're living or if it's wider parts of the dam we can't quite make out. But it's an interesting location. But I would say it's not particularly inconspicuous. It's it's a giant fortress on top of the mountain. It is a little bit Dr. Evil.
It is indeed very much. You can see it from miles around. Maybe it was a symbol of something in the past. Who knows? I suppose. Maybe the people who used to live here, if there was people. Well, people must have lived here because they built that forest, I suppose. So at some point, Brendok has had civilization, I suppose, unless the witches built themselves, which isn't implied. It's implied that they found it, I suppose. Kat, anything we've missed from this episode, or any Acolyte tidbits that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed yet?
I don't think so. I think we've really covered this episode in depth, and really we're just speculating because there is only one point of view, and it will be really exciting to look back on this episode after we know the other point of view.
Yep. So let's talk the future. Obviously, the next episode comes out on June the 18th, if you're on the American continent. Here in Europe and in the UK, it will be on the morning of June 19th. So get ready for that. No title as of yet. Obviously, we'll get the title when it's released, which is cool. We'll go to you first, Kat. Will the next episode sort of take place where we left off in episode 2, where we see Kelnaka, I suppose, in that swamp, as Shrek would say?
Yeah, I think it will. I think we're going to come back to the present timeline with Osha, Sol, Jackie, and Yord going to find Kelnaka and protect him. And I think we're only going to see this other point of view, which I suppose is going to be May's point of view, later in the series.
Chris, going to you. Will Kelnaka
Yeah.
die in the next episode?
Ooh. No, I don't think he will. I think he's going to hold out for a little bit purely because the first two Jedi Masters died in at least one case without giving up a fight at all. So I think Kalnaka is going to be, all he's done is, as I said, been at the back of a room and look cool. I think he's going to have to kick some ass before he bites a bullet. If he indeed does bite one, but I don't think he's ready to die just yet in the series.
Cool. Kat, I suppose I want to know from you, do you think we will see Jedi Council members Yarl Poof and Apo Rancis in the series?
Oh, I would love a bit. I would love a Jedi Council. Just a quick shot of them, very briefly, with maybe Vern goes to see them. I would like that.
Chris, any closing thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think it's interesting that with The Acolyte, we are returning back in some ways to kind of the roots of Star Wars. Star Wars being heavily inspired by Akira Kurosawa movies, and one of his most famous movies, the one that the special prize Oscar was given to him for, was Rashomon, and it does seem like it's going this way, where it's going to be telling the same story from different points of view, which in certain ways is always what Star Wars has played around and toyed with, or at least Obi-Wan would tell you that. So I think it's interesting that even now in the modern day, 40 plus years after the fact, we are returning back to some of the original inspirations for Star Wars to get a new way of playing around within the Star Wars sandbox that we all love.
Indeed, definitely. Kat, any closing thoughts?
I just totally agree with Chris, and it's great to see this return of these original amazing influences, inspirations on Star Wars, but in a completely different era than we've seen previously on screen. And it's working. It's bringing us a completely different side of the Jedi. It's hinting at maybe some Sith lore. And yeah, just I will remain very positive about the Acolytes and hope we can all stay positive about talking about this show.
Well, I've loved it so far. The first two episodes were a certain pace. I think we've took a deviation from this episode, but this episode dived into sort of the backstory more, flushed things out. Answered some questions, but also left more questions, which is also good when you're experiencing something for the first time, sort of story-wise. My brain's thinking of all different kinds of mad theories. As I've said, I think maybe are the Sith already on this planet? Have they already sort of got into May's mind, sort of how Snoke got into Kylo Ren's mind? Has this Sith Lord got into got into May's mind already as a child, and that's why these things happened. We don't know, sort of crazy theories, you know. So that's all the good stuff, I think. I suppose, Kat, this question for you. I know you loved the episode, but how much did you miss Yord?
I really miss Yord. I am officially part of the Yord Horde, and I'm looking forward to more Yord in upcoming Yord episodes.
Chris, did you miss Yord?
Of course, everybody missed Yord, obviously.
Well, everyone is online. It's a social media phenomenon that the Yord Horde has taken over the planet.
I definitely did miss. I think I was quite invested in the present day story, so I missed that little element of that. So yeah, I mean, put me in the Yord Horde. Why not?
Indeed.
You can also be in the
Kat, where
Soul
can the people find you
Patrol
on
as
social
well if
media?
you want to be.
I'm
You
definitely
can-
in the Soul Patrol. I'm all about Soul.
Is that what it's called? The Soul Patrol?
You
That's
can
awesome.
find- Yeah, that's the two current ones.
I
We're still
definitely
trying to figure out one for Jackie.
Ooh, I wonder what that one could be. But Jackie's my favourite so far of the non-main characters. I think, I think Jackie was really cool and very intriguing in the first two episodes. Let's wrap things up. Kat, where can the people find you on social media?
You can find me at Cat Kylo on Twitter, where I'm always talking about Star Wars, Kylo Ren, and keeping things positive.
Chris, where can people find Dystopian Simulation Radio, and what is it about?
Yes. So you can find my podcast, which is all about all of the two unbelievable things that happen in our world. Everything from aliens to ghosts to the most recent one we covered, which was a diet program that worked a little bit too well, as in you lost almost all of your weight and died. That one, not really too much of a hit in the modern day, but you can find us, our silly little podcast, over on Dystopian Simulation Radio, which you can find everywhere at d.s.radio. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on everything, just like this fine podcast is.
Very good. You can find myself on Twitter, or X as it's now known, on Instagram at Geordie Jedi Pete. You can find the podcast on X at Boars Star. You can also find the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Star Wars Podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave us a top review. A nice little 5 stars, nice little sentence, keeps all of us smiling for a long time, only takes you a few moments. It also helps people find the show. And if you are listening on any of the other wonderful podcast applications and it has a feature to leave a review, again, leave us a top review. Only takes you a few moments. It makes us smile for a long time. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. May the force be with you all. And remember, always tell that to Kancha Club.
The Dorky Diva Show presents
Why is this seat so much more comfortable?
the long-awaited sequel to the adventures of the Zolan Dart audio drama.
Have you seen the captain's datapad?
Trying to work, Murph.
Piloting the Zolan Dart by himself,
You do understand the details of this particular job, correct?
I've been on plenty of jobs like this. With you!
Reldar Sias returns to a planet he thought he'd left behind for good.
Is there a reason you didn't mention I was tagging along?
Hopefully having you there will make others think twice about messing with me.
Making new friends
Oh, you must be the pilot of the Zolan Dart, yes?
I guess I am.
and reconnecting with old ones,
Reldar?
Vera?
What are you doing here?
until past grudges resurface.
I'd be minding my own business if I were you.
Well, if your business wasn't being handled right in front of my face, maybe I could mind my own business. We have to leave. Now.
Why the rush all of a sudden?
We're in trouble.
If it isn't little Reldar Sias.
Hey, Yorick. Long time no see.
Roz already knows you're here.
Oh.
Look who decided to come home.
Reldar must confront his origin,
I must admit, I never saw this as being a part of your past, Softshell.
or let it define his future.
I will get what is owed to me, no matter the cost.
Because what Roz is trying to do is wrong.
Says you.
My blasters. We're going to need these. Take that, Sleemo.
Who do you think you are?
The Adventures of the Zolan Dart, Episode 2, coming soon.